A hot breeze blew a cloud of sand right into his face, and Randall had to turn his head to the side to keep himself from cursing. The sun, so high above, was scorching. Sand was everywhere, in every nook and cranny, and something told him that they hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. "Everything all right?" He managed a weak smile, then put out his arm to steady himself for a moment on his assistant's shoulder. Ginny? Well, Virginia was her full name, had followed him here, and even though he had thought it would be pointless at first, by now he was glad for her company. "Everything's fine," he lied, then felt a few grains of sand finding their way beneath his sunglasses, and closed his eyes to keep them out. "It's fine." Randall looked out from their vantage point atop one of the tallest dunes they had found, then back the way they had come. This was insane, he thought to himself. There was nothing out here, nothing besides the dunes and the burning hot sun. It was completely different from what he had expected when he had planned this expedition. Well, one could hardly call it that. It was more of a trip. Another one of his great ideas. Not thought through carefully, but a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing, he now had to admit to himself. Yet still, this tiny part of him urged him not to turn back. Out here, in the vast and empty lands, he might find it. The gate. "We just need to head in further. Or are you tired already?" With a smile, he turned his head to look at his assistant, who was wearing the exact same outfit as him, down to the backpack and shoes, but seemed far less exhausted, even at first glance. "We can go any time," she replied, and he felt her eyes finding his through the dark sunglasses. Randall gave her a nod, and then looked around once more before glancing back at the small device in his hand. The GPS. A lifesaver. Decades ago, people who had come here had tried to find the same place, but had done so with nothing but a compass and an inordinate amount of helpers to carry all their stuff. Today, all one needed was money and connections. If they hurried up, they would reach their destination before sundown. The rest of their stuff would be brought to them by a group of nomad-adjacent locals, as he liked to describe them, tomorrow. All they needed to do was spend the day and night out here. He could see Ginny giving him a nod, then starting to slowly move down the side of the dune while he followed. The sand was shifting beneath the soles of his shoes, and not for the first time, Randall contemplated all the things he hadn't fully thought through. Maybe they should have joined the guys that would bring their stuff, pay them extra to guide them out here. But no, in his arrogance, he had thought it would be fun to set off alone. Well, maybe not fun, but it would make for a far better story. He hadn't thought about how bad it could get out here, about the heat, the constant glaring sun, the sand that got everywhere, or the weight of their backpacks. Yeah, he was miserable right now. Virginia reached the bottom of the dune, where they could at least get some respite from the searing breeze for a few seconds, and waited for him to join her. "This feels like we're stuck in one of those convection ovens," he heard her say, and gave her a weak nod. "I just need a few moments," Randall replied, and put down the backpack by his feet before pulling out one of the bottles of water. The first one was almost empty. Then again, they had packed enough to make it through 2 whole days, which had inadvertently slowed them down. But right now, he was glad they had done so. Their stuff would arrive tomorrow, he repeated in his mind. And as long as the tracker worked, the people he had paid would deliver it all to wherever they ended up. Randall sat down on the sand, felt the heat through his pants, and shot up again. Damn, he couldn't even put up his feet here. Everything okay? Ginny asked again, now standing there with her own water bottle in hand. Another weak nod was all he could spare her. Just concentrate on the reason you've come out here, Randall told himself in his mind, while he slowly swirled some water around his mouth. It was an old story, one that had its origin in the oral traditions of the nomads out here, but had survived the tides of time until today. The Gate of the Dead. Apparently, even thousands of years back, people stumbled upon a certain spot out here, amidst the dunes where this strange phenomenon took place. Some people reported that they had heard eerie sounds. Others talked about humanoid shapes walking past them when they had camped between the dunes. And they all had one thing in common. The people who told those stories were never willing to go back and show someone else. Randall had heard about it first a decade ago, back at his old college, where some professors had laughed about it while drinking their nights away throwing parties for the departments. It had resonated with him even then. Something about it, no, everything about it had piqued his interest. The dunes out here and the wide open landscape. Some unknown phenomenon, a chance to see something almost no one else could witness. This fantasy had never left him, not even when he had changed jobs and started fresh in another part of the country. Every time he had seen a picture of this desert, those same feelings had popped up again. And last year, with his diagnosis, he had finally found a reason to travel to this place. He didn't have much time left anyway, so any risk he was about to take was completely worth it. The only thing he hadn't planned for was Virginia. She had demanded that she would accompany him, and even though he had resisted at first, in the end, she won. Maybe we should stay here for a few more minutes? You look kinda pale, to be honest, he heard her saying, and shook his head in response. We'll set off immediately. Our stuff will be delivered tomorrow, so we need to reach our destination before then. Otherwise, we might be forced to move everything on our own. Something I'd rather avoid. Randall put away the empty water bottle and picked up the backpack again. At least it was getting lighter, he told himself, and managed another weak smile. Which direction? He could feel Ginny's eyes on him, and this time didn't even need to look down at the GPS, but raised one arm and pointed toward the next dune before he took the lead. They were ascending and descending dune after dune, while the sun was scorching the sand beneath their feet, and the soft breeze seemed to singe any uncovered part of his skin. It reminded him of the ocean, Randall thought, just as they came down from one of the smaller dunes. Those mountains of sand moved like waves. Slowly, but steadily they shifted in the wind. There was nothing on the horizon but more sand, no place to sit down and escape the scorching sun or take a breather. He knew that some people liked to drive out here in modified vehicles, But that was something he had wanted to avoid for himself. Machines hate sand, one of his mentors had told him once. And since he wasn't very well versed in them, getting a vehicle stuck on the side of the dunes would only slow his trip down. It was better like this, setting off on foot, with their supplies following later. From time to time, he could see something moving below the sand. Insects or small reptiles or whatever, shifting their bodies as his footfalls approached. This place wasn't a place meant for life, he thought grimly. It was one of death. How many people had died out there? It was hard to say. Even with his modern technology, he could easily imagine himself getting lost and dying of thirst and exposure in a day. How did the people of old manage not to lose their minds once they entered the open desert? Were they just that much stronger? Or didn't they care about their lives at all? What had driven them? Randall suddenly slipped and started to slide down the dune's back. He could feel the hot sand moving up and around himself, the scorching grains finding their way beneath his clothing, searing his skin as he howled in pain. Somewhere behind him, Virginia screamed as he started to pick up speed. His body turned as he slid down quicker and quicker, searing sand now spraying up to his face, burning his cheeks. There was nothing around him to stop his descent. No tree to hold on to, no roots sticking out of the ground. He could feel himself losing any sense of direction as the tiny burning grains flooded him and found their way beneath his bandana. Randall put out his elbow to stop, but suddenly turned over. The backpack slipped from his shoulders as he rolled down the slope, now only seeing flashes of the blue sky and dark shadow beneath himself repeating over and over again. Around him, the world suddenly seemed to turn black. He couldn't feel the hot sand anymore, or the pain. It was quiet, calm. Randall almost felt like he was drifting around space. All the fear and uncertainty vanished. He was at peace. At least, until he heard it. A sound coming from somewhere not too far away. Breathing, shambling, moaning. The noise of people walking past him. He tried to turn around and catch a glimpse of them, but the darkness surrounding him was impenetrable. Randall! Wake the fuck up! A sharp pain pierced his chest as he got pulled from the dream and looked up into the worried face of his assistant. He groaned and shifted his body. At least he could still feel his arms and legs. Nothing was broken. Are you okay? There was real worry in her voice. Ginny sounded scared. Randall raised one hand and touched the side of his own face. The bandana was off. Had she done it, or had it gotten lost as he slid down the dune? He turned his head slowly, and only now realized that Ginny had put something soft beneath him, as well as one of the tarps to protect him from the glaring sun. You were out for a few minutes, he heard her saying, while she doused her hand in water, then wiped his forehead. Randall swallowed hard and tried to lift his head, but the woman pushed him down again. Don't. You need to take it easy now, you hear? How long had he really been out? He could feel a headache coming on and closed his eyes for a moment. The heat was still all around him, but with his head out of the direct sun, he could slowly feel his thoughts straightening out as well. What was that dream? what he had seen, heard. Ginny pressed a bottle of water into his hand, and he took a careful sip. Something had changed around here, he suddenly thought. He listened closely. Besides the noise of the water sloshing around his stomach and his slow yet steady heartbeat, he thought he could hear something else. Far away. The sound of people walking over the sand. A faint moan, pitiful and drawn out. The gate of the dead, a place that drew in souls to send them off. He could feel a shiver in his bones despite the heat. Was this the reason he had come here? Some subconscious desire to see what it would look like? Randall softly pushed away the woman's hand, sat up, and opened his eyes. The world was spinning around him. Softly, but still disorienting. He could feel himself getting sick, but fought against it. We could rest now and just make up the time by moving through the night, his assistant offered, and even though Randall didn't want to admit that she was right, he couldn't find the strength to argue against her idea. So he nodded and took a deep breath. Slowly, he started to get up more and more, and the nausea he felt seemed to recede. It was still hard, breathing calmly in the heat, while his lips and chin felt raw and hot. Maybe they should have gone at this differently, he thought. Then again, every time he closed his eyes, he felt like he could hear it. The shuffling of people. They were still far away. Where exactly is this Gate of the Dead? He heard Ginny asking after he had finally managed to get up on his knees. Randall swallowed and felt this rough and painful feeling in his throat. That's the question, he mumbled as a response, then straightened up to look at his assistant. It's not like there's a way for people to talk about a fixed point out here. There are no rock formations, no trees or anything like that around. All you can see is the sand dunes, and even they are moving. The oldest oil report, one that should be over 1,000 years old, talks about setting off from what used to be a city bordering the desert and walking southeast for 1.5 days. The one we set off from isn't nearly as old, but if you look at a map, you should see that we're pretty much going in the same direction as people did back then. There are other reports by travelers only a few decades old, and they've all come upon it in pretty much the same place, or at least the same region. I don't think we're far off now anyway. We either find it quickly, or not at all, I would say. He could see a pained grin on his assistant's face. It was strange. Somehow, Randall could feel it. They were close, he knew, even though he couldn't say why. Maybe this Gate of the Dead wasn't a fixed point somewhere out here. What if it moved? And the only people able to stumble upon it were those bound for death soon anyway. Another cold chill seemed to grip him, and he closed his eyes. They were there, close by. He could hear them, feel them. Randall opened his eyes again, put up his bandana and the sunglasses before he gave Ginny a nod. It was time to set off again. The gate was waiting for them. This time, he helped her pack away the tarp and the 2 struts she had put up. Then he let her take the lead. It felt different from before. Somehow, The heat was the same, maybe even worse. But it didn't bother him that much. It almost felt as if his innermost part, his core, didn't get touched by it at all. He didn't mind his feet sinking into the sand as they ascended the next few dunes, the hot wind or even the searing grains that still found their way beneath his clothing from time to time. Whenever he closed his eyes now, he could hear them walking along the dunes. Even though he couldn't see their bodies, he knew they were out there, somewhere. Randall stopped looking down at his GPS at all. The people bringing their supplies would find them anyway. He didn't need to stick to any kind of spot right now. The only thing slowing him down now was his assistant. He could see it. Her steps got shorter, the breaths she took becoming shallower, and the breaks she needed getting longer the further they got. Compared to her, he felt, well, pretty much fine. It wasn't like the heat didn't bother him anymore, or that he wasn't tired. There was this dull ache in his head, the muscles in his legs were burning. But it all seemed to get pushed back down by this strange urge to go on. Something was calling out to him, he thought, and looked over at Ginny, now sitting on that small pillow she had put beneath his head when he had lost consciousness. Between her big sips from the bottle, she was breathing heavily, then shaking her head and wiping sweat from her brow. He could see the sand forming a sheen on her skin, and wondered if it was doing the same to him. Randall touched his own forehead, but found it free from the sand. His skin was dry and almost clammy, he thought, then shook his head softly. Maybe he was running a fever. Probably. But it didn't really feel like it, if he was honest. He wasn't thirsty, didn't feel weak or tired. Something had changed in him, but he couldn't put his finger on it yet. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the sounds surrounding them. The wind blowing sand off the dunes, tiny grains scraping against each other, the noise of naked feet stepping through the sand, a shuffling, moaning sound. He could feel his heart rate picking up. They were closer. This was the way. He couldn't hide the smile, and even though he wanted nothing more than to start running right this moment, Randall kept himself back. His assistant wouldn't make it far. She seemed exhausted already, and it wouldn't do him any good to force her to continue on right this moment. He needed to give her a bit of time. Whatever those things he could hear and feel now were, they wouldn't disappear because he stopped for 5 more minutes. Randall turned and continued listening. They were calling out to him, showing him the way with their sounds. The more he concentrated, the louder the noises got. Slowly, he could differentiate between them. There was a group, 5 or 6 of them. They were heading in the same direction as before. Their slow steps were echoing back from the dunes. He could hear one of them groaning every time they put down their feet. "Everything okay, Randall?" Ginny's voice pulled him from his trance, and he shot around to look at her. She had a strange, quizzical expression on her face. "You've been standing there for almost half an hour. We should really get going now." He looked up and could see that the position of the sun had changed already. Randall nodded and pointed to the crest of the next dune. That was where they should be heading. He let Ginny take the lead again, not because he felt weak this time, but because he didn't want to leave her behind inadvertently. Right now, he felt like he could march for days without rest. Not that he would need to. They weren't too far off now. Randall glanced at the GPS for once and could see that the original plan had now changed. They should be heading south right now, but this feeling told him to turn east. It didn't matter. He knew he was right, just as he had known that this was real all along. The ones bringing their supplies would catch up with them either way, and even if they didn't, well, something told him that he might not need them after all. He could hear Ginny cursing in front of him and shook his head to get himself out of his thoughts. She was just 2 steps ahead, but her feet kept slipping. Randall put out a hand and pushed her on. The sand. It wasn't as treacherous as he had first thought. As long as one didn't fight against it, it was easy to walk upon. He helped Ginny up to the ridge and stopped and thought for a moment. This was something else that had changed in him. I could feel it now, understand it. This place had its own rules. From the heat to the sand, fighting against it was pointless. It would dry you out and make you sink. All those born here knew it as well, from the animals to the things walking around. Ginny tried to take another step, but he held her back by her shoulder. "I don't really need a break," he heard her say, in her now raspy and dried-out voice. Randall simply shook his head.
"We have arrived. This here. It's the spot."
He could feel her eyes on him, but didn't meet her gaze. Up here on this ridge was the place he had meant to reach. Randall closed his eyes for a moment and listened. There was no wind, no rushing of sand around. All he could hear was the footsteps of beings walking along the dunes.
"Thank you for helping me,"
he told his assistant without opening his eyes.
"Now all I need to do is wait."
The hand touched his shoulder and tugged on it. "Is everything okay? What do you mean?" Randall was shaking his head softly. He couldn't explain it. He knew. This feeling told him that he had reached the end of his journey. That right here was the spot he was meant to be.
"You should leave now. I don't know what will happen, and you don't need to be a part of this."
The tug on his shoulder got harder. "Even if I wanted to leave, how should I reach the city before nightfall? It gets freezing out here." Randall nodded and opened his eyes. She was right, and yet he could hardly muster any sympathy. He took off his backpack and handed it to her.
"Take the GPS, the water, whatever you need. This is the end of my journey."
Her eyes were on him, and he wondered for a moment what he looked like to her now. Judging by her expression, she probably thought he had gone insane. Randall reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out the tracker before handing it to her. "So, you really want to die out here? He didn't need to answer her question. Other things were more important. The sun would soon be setting.
"Leave,"
he simply said, then turned his body and closed his eyes. He could still hear them, and that was enough. Ginny tried talking to him, but he hardly noticed. It was coming, the thing he had waited for. When Randall opened his eyes again, he could see that Ginny had already left. There, by his feet, was his backpack, one of the small tents, and 2 bottles of water. He couldn't even smile. Those were all things he had no need for anymore. The sun was already setting. Randall took off his clothing and sat down on the dune. Without the sunglasses, this place looked even more marvelous. He could feel the hot wind on his skin and the searing sand below, but there was no pain anymore. This was it, he told himself. The one thing he had been so afraid of when he had gotten his diagnosis. And now, he had searched it out and was staring right at it. His end. But he didn't feel any fear. This was the place where he was meant to be. Randall looked on as the sun slowly disappeared. It was painting shadows on the dunes while the wind started cooling down. He felt peaceful, at ease, for the first time in a long while. Not long now, he mumbled, and suddenly started to hear something, even with his eyes now open. The shuffling of feet through the sand. It was giving him goosebumps. Randall looked around, and in the darkest shadows, he could see them. Figures shining softly as they drudged through the sand. This was his cue. He would see it, find it. He rose up and glanced at the sun that was disappearing behind the horizon. The last time he would ever see it, some part of him warned, but he didn't care. As soon as the tip of the sun had vanished, the world got bathed in shadows. An ice-cold breeze blew past him as he stood there and looked down at the other dunes. There were figures everywhere, not just a few, but hundreds of them, shuffling along the sand, and all of them were walking in the same direction. Randall slid down the side of the dune to take his place. The sand felt soft beneath the soles of his feet as he reached a small group of 4 and started to follow them. They didn't talk. Couldn't. Their emaciated bodies were dragging themselves along, and even though he followed them, none of them turned back to look at him. They all looked straight ahead, as if something was calling out to them. Why couldn't he hear or see it? Randall pondered that question while the temperature around him sank and more of those emaciated figures started to walk along the dunes in the area. Well, he was sure he would soon find his answer. It was too late to turn back now anyway. He stole glances at his side as the group descended the dune and walked toward another one. The others were walking just like them. He could see the figures of people of all ages and genders. Young girls walked beside old men, all looking just the same. Their heads bowed, their bodies thin. Some of them were groaning, others sobbing. This was a procession of the dead, and they all walked toward the same goal. Randall left the group he had followed at first, quickened his steps, and ascended the next dune. There were things, small insects, brushing past his feet. They were running away in the opposite direction. As all living beings should, a part of him warned. Randall didn't care. He ascended the next dune, then another. Groups of the dead were walking beside him. And up ahead, he could see it. The last big mountain of sand all the group seemed to aim for. A cold chill gripped him as he put his foot on its base. This was it, he knew. The last dune. One last time he needed to climb. He could feel that tiny part of himself still warning him to turn and run, extinguish in the ecstasy he now experienced. It felt like a maelstrom, pulling him and all the others in. This was the place he was meant to be, Randall told himself. With every step he took, he could feel the smile on his lips getting wider until his skin started to crack. His final destination. A small group of the dead was coming up beside him, their heads still bowed, their steps sluggish and slow. There was no fear anymore. He reached the crest of the dune and pushed himself up. Randall thought his heart was going to stop. Down there in the darkness, he could see it. It looked like a hole at first glance. The dunes had shifted around it and gave way to what seemed like stairs carved in the stone beneath the sand. Others were down there before him. Groups of the dead, walking right into the darkness. He could hardly feel the sand beneath his soles as he slid down the side of the dune. There would be no pain anymore, no fear. He cried and felt the tears running down his cheek.
Finally, free,
he whispered as his foot touched the smooth stone of the first step. Virginia groaned as she tossed and turned on the mattress of the cheap hotel. Her employer's end was nothing more than a footnote in one of the newspapers. She had been the one to find him, but try as she might, the journalists hadn't listened to a single word she had said. After meeting up with the guys that were to bring their supplies, she had talked the leader into coming with her, back to the spot where she had left Randall behind, after he had sunken in this strange trance. They had found his backpack and his clothing atop the dune, completely untouched, and had started their search. 2 hours later, right in the direction he had been staring, she had found him. His remains. A dead, completely dried out husk, half buried in the sand. The body had looked like it had been there for months, even though she had stood right next to him hardly more than 12 hours before. She had touched him, and that was when this strange nightmare had started. Even now she could hear it. The sound. People walking through the sand, close by and yet far away. They were calling out to her without saying a single word. She groaned again and opened her eyes. It was calling her, she knew, deep in her mind, pulling her in. And soon, she would find herself out there as well.